Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining me to talk about DAO commissions or DAO committees, and how they can bridge traditional and decentralized governance. And before going into the specifics of DAO committees, I want to take the opportunity to zoom a bit out and talk about DAOs in general. DAOs are quite complex organizations. They consist of several individual entities that are seemingly sometimes separate from another. They, like other complex organizations, the rules at the beginning that you set out can have unforeseeable consequences in the future. And that makes it quite hard to foresee and steer DAOs in general. But DAOs are meant and they're structured to achieve a purpose. When I did this presentation, this thing was a GIF and it moved. It's one of the strand beasts, it's called. It's an art movement or an art object by a Dutch artist. And seemingly all the elements of the strand beast are moving forward in the same direction. The purposes of DAOs are manifold, but they're mostly product-driven, and this is due to the nature of our industry. So there's purposes like lending, staking, naming services, gaming, L2, payment. Obviously for us at Safe, it's smart accounts. We absolutely love smart accounts, and we're kind of obsessed with them. So the purpose of Safe DAO, just as an example, is establishing smart accounts as the default means for Web3 interactions. So how is this purpose achieved? There's usually two things. One is developing the technology, the underlying infrastructure, the rails of the activities that we want to enable, and it's building the ecosystem on top. The ecosystem consists of users at the end, they consist of builders, of developers, so really trying to get these two things together to achieve the purpose that the DAO set itself. But like, what is the most efficient way? DAOs struggle with finding commercially efficient ways to reach the purpose and also legally compliant ways to reach these purposes. And unlike with your IKEA manual, where at the end you can call IKEA if you don't know what you're doing, at DAOs there's no such thing, but you need to think about these things very much in advance. So to reach a purpose, usually there's three elements involved. There's financing, somebody has to pay for it, has to allocate resources. Somebody is giving the vision, is giving instructions, ways how this purpose can be achieved, and someone is doing the work and actually pushing it forward. And if we compare DAOs to other organizations very broadly, we can learn quite a lot of things from it. So nation states, meaning cities, countries, governmental agencies, when it comes to funding, they usually fund external parties to do their work. This also has changed over the last decades. More and more activities of nation states are being privatized. If you think about garbage disposal, if you think about health, even some parts of securities, so activities that are very, very core actually to the responsibilities of nation states when it comes to the actual work and the financing. It's actually being involved by external parties. And the nation states, instead of directing every single step in like a very direct way of instructing, they rather set operational procedures and rules how this work is being done and how the funds are being allocated. If we move to the spectrum a little bit to the side, we have fiduciary entities, certain foundations that often have a non-profit goal. They're also very similar to nation states in the sense of they even more fund external parties. The work is mostly outsourced, and also they don't give like direct instructions how the work should be done, but if so, at all operational procedures. And on the end of the spectrum, we have corporations. Corporations have to fund their work by themselves. They have to find business models to fund it. The work is being done by themselves. And when it comes to instructions, you have a direct chain of commands and a direct chain of instructions to the work that is being done. And if we compare that with DAOs, we have DAOs more to the side of nation states and fiduciary entities. In DAOs, there is a clear separation between resource allocation, operational procedures on the one side, and actually executing the activities on the other side. And with operation procedures in a DAO context, that can be the rules, the ways how the DAO decides on its decision-making, on its governance, but it can also be the rules of the underlying smart contracts that govern the protocol. So there's certain parameters, there's certain decisions that the DAO can influence, but mostly it's limited to a certain scope. The activities are done by someone else. And for this talk, I want to talk more about the resource allocation part of it. Resource allocation in itself is a commercial activity. If you allocate resources to someone and you expect an outcome, this is always entailed with risks. And risk per se is nothing bad. It's just something that is in our society. Our whole society probably is built around risks and people and societies taking these risks. And it's good for social welfare. Because only if you take risks, there is outcomes that move society forward. So how do you usually deal with risks? Kind of like Econ 101 would be, well, there's a part of risk reduction, meaning how can you actually reduce the risk based on the outcomes. But if you reduce your risks too much, it can cripple the commercial activity. The second part of it is risk diversification. So how do you actually diversify your risk, and how do you not put all your eggs in one basket? And this part of putting not your eggs in one basket is something that states that law actually incentivizes and enables. So legal structures came up with something that are not chips, but what they actually came up with is legal entities. The commerce that we had over the centuries is mostly built around entities and their value proposition. It all comes down to three elements. And starting with the first ones, it's entity shielding. So entity shielding is really just another term for not putting all the eggs in one basket and being able to allocate it into different risk spheres. Entity shielding comes in two ways. One is that there is a priority, meaning that the creditors of your business and the creditors of your personal sphere, there is clear where they can go into to which assets they actually can go to. So meaning if your creditors from your business are only able to go after the assets of the business. In the DAO context, this already has become relevant. If we look at the Uki DAO case, the CFTC is mostly going against the assets of the DAO. Even though wasn't a legal entity, it's seen as a partnership, and even there you have the priority between assets of the business and assets of the members involved. The second element of entity shielding is liquidity protection. So as a society, you don't want to incentivize that when members leave an organization, shareholders, employees, etc., that the whole organization dissolves. So there's a strong interest in like going concern, meaning that the organization survives even if individual members enter or exit. That is also something that is a very strong value proposition of legal entities. In the DAO context, you can also have that different. You have something like rage quitting, for instance, Moloch DAO, where you're actually able to exit an organization. You're also able to take certain assets with you. But usually in legal entities, you don't have that. The assets stay with the legal entity. The second one is limiting liability. So as said, there's a clear differentiation between the creditors of your personal sphere that cannot go against the assets of the business, and your creditors of your business sphere that cannot go against the assets of your personal sphere. And that is extremely important for diversification of risks. If this wasn't the case, and liability wouldn't be limited, but it would also go in your personal sphere, you wouldn't be able to finance several ventures, to be involved in several ventures. You would only be able to maybe involved in one and would have to control the directors very, very closely. So by limiting liability and entity shielding, you can actually diversify your risk and be involved in more ventures. And the third element is something that's called nexus of contracts. A company is seen as, the value of a company is seen as the contract that it aggregates over time. This is something that is built upon thoughts from economists in the 30s, like Ronald Coase, who got a Nobel Prize for looking at transaction costs actually of companies, and thoughts of Jensen and Macklin that said that, that companies are actually these nexus of contracts, and that's where the value is. And if we compare that again to DAOs, also in DAOs we might seemingly not have contracts, but we have contractual relationships. We have the development company that is involved. We have the ecosystem of developers. We have delegates. So we do have bindings towards the core entity. And if the legal entity wouldn't be able to enable this, that would mean that we wouldn't have anything like transferable shares. So it's really about reduction of transaction costs and increase of social welfare. So legal entities per se are nothing bad. It's more the question like which legal entity to choose. And on the broad spectrum, there's DAO native entities, solely a few, with the Wyoming DAO LLC, and there's non-DAO native entities. And so there's a variety to choose from depending on which jurisdiction. But if one really wants to split it up, there's fiduciary entities that don't have shareholders, they have beneficiaries, and we have shareholder entities. But it all comes down to structuring. And within DAOs, we see the trend and the meta of delegating resource allocations to lower levels, actually, and to outer spheres of the DAO. So we have working groups, we have something like grants councils, we have even more institutionalized sub-DAOs, sub-orgs. So that actually means that the people that are consisting these organizations, the organization decide about the budget, very often also with their own multi-sig, or sometimes without their own multi-sig, with their legal entity, without of their legal entity. But it's definitely pushing this towards the outside and taking it away from the DAO core. But this comes with its shortcomings. First of all, this pushing of responsibilities also comes not only with delegation of tasks, but actually with legal responsibilities to the outskirts. The members involved have to think now about which legal entity to choose, or if they should choose a legal entity, and if their actions actually trigger anything. So organizations do not, these organizations that have been delegated these tasks to, they do not profit from the legal entity of the DAO and not of the value propositions that we went through. And the risk, there's advantages to seeing it this way, but there's also risk that this whole system organism becomes extremely complex. You can have at one point organizations that are so big and so fragmented that you have a lack how incentives are aligned, and that it becomes to a scale that it's not actually commercially efficient anymore. So what we're doing at SAFE and at SafeDAO, we're trying to explore what can we do with our Swiss foundation, and how can we involve something called committees as native bodies within the foundation. So what are foundations? There's two principles that foundations adhere to. It's one, clear asset separation. The assets that are given are endowed for a specific purpose. It's very separate from the people who set up the assets in the first place, and it's very hard to change the purpose of the foundation. So it's very rigid. Once putting a purpose into the deed under Swiss foundation law, it's practically impossible to change it. You could think about it like it's almost hard-coded into it. And that's because there's the thought of that this foundation lives eternal. It lives longer than the people who have set it up. And that's why the purpose has to be so well defined and structured. And this is, as an example, the purpose of the Safe Ecosystem Foundation. It's very, very detailed in the sense of developing the technology for the Safe Ecosystem Foundation. Below, you'll see like the ways how this purpose can be achieved. So it's not just like a one-liner, but it's clearly stated what can be done. So Swiss foundations are orphan structures, meaning they don't have shareholders, they don't have members like associations, they only have beneficiaries. They only have people who should benefit from the resource allocation. And that's why it's quite a fitting legal entities for DAOs and the way how they allocate resources. Instead of a board of directors who is very independent in the decision making, the foundation council solely implements, they execute the purpose. They don't have independent decision making per se. And because of the lack of shareholders and the lack of members that could oversee it, the Swiss foundations are actually under national supervision. So the national supervisor looks if the resource allocation was done in a way that it serves the purpose. DAO committees now are bodies within the foundation. So they're really integrated into the foundational structure and are not outside of it, like how, for instance, a working group would be or a sub-DAO would be. The foundation council delegates certain tasks, certain responsibilities to these DAO committees. And at the end, it's three parts that consist of DAO committee of. It's personnel, it's a certain mandate, how to achieve the purpose of the foundation, and it's a budget. So within this budget and within this mandate, the DAO committee can decide how to allocate it. How does it interact with the DAO itself? So on the right side, you see DAOs with their token holders, with their delegates that make certain decisions, that decide, for instance, also if a DAO committee is going to be established, who's going to be the personnel of the DAO committee, what it should be doing, and they signal towards the foundation council to establish this DAO committee and then to set it up with members actually solely of DAO members. And then this DAO committee can start actually interacting, can start acting on behalf of the foundation internally, and the foundation council can then go into different contracts with outside parties. So the value proposition of committees is pretty strong. You have a very good accessibility, you have a low barrier of entry for people who want to act within a DAO, who want to do work within a DAO and want to make decisions within a DAO. They will not have to think about their own legal entities that they have to set up, or if their actions actually trigger certain liabilities. You profit from the limited liability of the foundation, because it's always the foundation that acts as a counterpart, and the native body is something internal that makes the decisions and gives it to the foundation council. And a very strong value proposition is that in foundations, this is legally recognized. So you do have a framework that has already been developed over the last decades for it. It hasn't been used so far yet in DAOs, but it's something that foundations are very familiar with. So what we're doing right now is we're talking to the national supervisor, and our deed actually in the Safe Ecosystem Foundation allows for these entities and these committees to be established. We're seeing if we can have them set up solely, for instance, with DAO members. And if you want to keep up, please scan the code on the left that directs to our governance hub. There we're talking more about how the foundation actually interacts with the DAO. And the right side, you can follow us on Twitter, and you can see the things that are happening within Safe DAO and how we implement these DAO committees in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andre. That was very interesting, and for me it was quite interesting to learn about the committees here. I just have one question before I give it to the audience. In the so with the committees, is this is the committee duration or the members within the committee, is it time bound or task bound, or is it a mix of both?
It can be both. So there are some committees that can be set for a specific purpose. This purpose is reached, the committee will dissolve. Can also be seen, for instance, for a certain season. So you can set it up for a grants council, and if like the wave is over, the committee would also dissolve. Or you can also set it up for ongoing work and ongoing activities. So that can be like support for the DAO, that can be operations that are being helped on. So it's really a whole range. It's very flexible. You can do with them.
Great, thanks. So now, guys, anybody questions for Andre here? One second.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I was wondering if this is an option also for smaller starting DeFi projects that don't have that much funding. So basically my question is, what does it cost to set up a Swiss foundation?
Yes, that's a good question. So setting up a Swiss foundation comes with like capital requirements. It comes with administrative oversight. So the Swiss foundation model is something that is for more larger projects and where you can afford these transaction costs that are coming with that. But it would be interesting to see if something like DAO committees can, for instance, also be done with like a Cayman foundation or something that is a bit cheaper to do. But the Swiss regulator, let's say, they give this framework, and you would have to establish a Swiss foundation to have also like the jurisprudence that comes with it.
Thank you. Sadly, I was a bit late to your talk, so I'm just wondering, with regards to governance in SAFE, what are you most excited about for the future?
Yes. I think what I'm most excited about is to see actually how the DAO matures. So the DAO was set up quite early. We do have a token that is used as a governance token, and more responsibilities are being handed over to the DAO, used by the DAO. And that comes like with the increased activity of it, working on different milestones actually, and people are quite involved and doing work and voicing their opinions. Very exciting will be how product governance at one point might be handed over to the DAO. So how will, for instance, like the protocol, something like parameters governed by the DAOs. And yes, I think it's very interesting to see how products and protocols mature and how the DAO matures alongside it.
We have time for one last question. Anybody? All right. Thank you, Andre. That was very interesting, and wish you a good rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Give it up for Andre, guys.